I've got Melanie here tuning in, and really excited to be hearing from her today. And she is the director of the Australian Urban Observatory, and really leading forward with environmental social governance and these various indicators that are really, telling the story of where the future's going, where we're at right now. And yeah, Melanie, I'll just lead it over to you. I'd love to hear your own introduction, and yeah, I'm here if you'd like any questions or would like to have a chat. If not, just happy for you to just roll on through. But really delighted to have you joining us here today, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. Yes, it was wonderful watching those videos. What an introduction. And I'm taking quotes from those children. It was brilliant. So I might just share my screen. I can. Oh, I have disabled screen sharing if someone would like to help me.
Yeah, but I think we'll fix that right now. It's just
no worries.
Hosting abilities. And are you tuning in from Dandenong right now? Whereabouts are you, Melanie?
I'm at RMIT on campus in the middle of COVID City, so it seems at the moment.
Indeed, I just came back to Far North Queensland yesterday, and everyone was like, "Oh, you just got out of there at the right time." So yeah. Hopefully it doesn't all spike off again. But let me just see if we can get you that hosting. Let me just
Let's try again. No, still not happening. Well, you know, the interesting thing was, Barney, I have a colleague who's based in Sydney who hasn't been with me for nearly 6 months, and she just came down for the week and got here first day, and then we had a COVID spike, and I'm having to send her home again.
That's a bit rough. I think our technical team.
Okay, now I can go. All good, all good.
Too easy, Melanie. Enjoy. And yeah, if you need any questions, or I'm here listening if you'd like to run anything by. But
no problem. Thank you very much for the introduction, and let's get going. Go into here we go. Okay, fantastic. So thanks for the opportunity to speak today, and as always, I shall begin by acknowledging the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nations, on whose unceded land that I am seated today, and we conduct the business of the University of RMIT, and elders past, present and future, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders with us today within the audience. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about local livability. And this session really is to do a bit of an introduction, and that's what I'm going to go through. I'm going to talk to you about this tool that you can go away and play with to explore your own local livability. And I'm also going to then get some question and answers happening, because I want to get some insights from people watching today and to understand what you're thinking about some of the good parts of living in Greater Dandenong are, and to use our tool to have a look at that. So a little bit interactive. So you'll see we'll get into that, but before we go into anything where you have to think too hard, I'm going to give you a general introduction. So I'll get started and move on. So the most important thing I think really to talk about in here, which connects beautifully to the Forever Fest work, and I wanted to say a big thank you for Steph, which I haven't done so far, for the invitation to come and be involved today, is really trying to think about why livability is important and how does it connect to sustainability, because the two are really very much intertwined. You cannot have a livable place that is not a sustainable place. So this is really important, and I think sometimes we hear these catch cries like livability and sustainability and stop perhaps thinking about what do these concepts actually mean. So I wanted to start and tell you about this definition that we came up with back in around 2012, 2013. And the interest for me came from this came from public health, and it was thinking about how we can use social, economic and environmental measures to inform policy and planning. So really to build better places that support health and well-being. So you can see the definition on screen here, which talks about what livability is. And we would say that it's somewhere that's safe, it's socially cohesive and inclusive, It needs to be environmentally sustainable, with affordable and diverse housing linked via public transport, walking and cycling infrastructure to employment, education, public open space, local shops, health and community services, and leisure and cultural opportunities. The reason I really like this definition, although it's really long, I want you all just sitting there thinking about things at the moment, listening in the audience, and think about what sort of things do you look for when you're looking for a place to live? Because in general, these are the sorts of things that many of us are looking for. We're looking for things like schools and shops and transport. We're looking how far we have to travel to work. We're looking at our opportunities to move around our community, which is not just about understanding where the roads are, but most importantly, how can we walk around our communities? How can we ride? How can we cycle? And trying to build in active transport to our everyday lives as well. So these kind of transport measures and these kind of setups in how we build our places, the livability of these places is really important for the sustainability. Because obviously, if we're having to drive big cars everywhere to do everything we're going to do, where, like just listening to the children earlier, giving us those great definitions of what, you know, the greenhouse effect is, and decarboning our economy really talks to the fact that we're really trying to get away from the use of transport like that, and we really want to encourage public transport and active transport as well. One of the great things about active transport, I'll have to say, is it's free, that nobody has to pay for it too, and there is no cost to the environment, and you get the health benefits to go with it. So I guess this is where this really all connects in. It's not just a livability discussion, but a livable place is a sustainable place, and doing all of those sorts of things. Moving on now. So this is really just a bit of an understanding that takes you into the health world. So when we talk about health in general, and we talk about health budgets, people tend to think about health funding being the funding of hospitals. And that is the majority of where our health funding goes. But we also want people to think a little bit more about preventative health measures, or the health promotion world, where we can actually try and prevent diseases before they occur. And that really does connect into urban planning. And this is why I sit now within the Centre for Urban Research at RMIT University, because I've really taken that public health background and combined it with the need for urban planning, because we can see that if we're going to have the greatest impact on people's health, we can actually do that by understanding the environments in which they live. And here we have a couple of diagrams on screen that talk about something called the social determinants of health. So the social determinants of health really refer to the conditions where people are born, where they live, where they learn, where they play, where they age. All of those factors really have a massive influence on our long-term health outcomes. So we know that if you are living in a place where it's hard to find good fresh food, it's hard to exercise, it's hard to use active transport, it's hard to have time to do these things, then those things are also going to have our outcomes in terms of our physical activity, in terms of our diet, in terms of how we live our everyday lives. And you can see on here that brings to us that connection between heart disease as the leading cause of death in Australia. So I don't want to be doom and gloom, but I just want to bring those connections between where we live, how we live, and how we design places, and how this is actually connected to health. And we really want to think about what can we do to build a sustainable, livable place that's going to be encouraging health and well-being, rather than just going with what we have done in the past. And I guess, again, listening to the children, you can hear, we have this climate emergency now. We're needing to have acted 10 years ago, but hey, if we're going to do something, let's do it now, because we need to be thinking about these broader connections across areas of our cities, of our towns, and thinking about how can we work together to create these outcomes, because they're often not just managed by one particular area, but multiple areas or multiple people have responsibility across these as well. Hello, Hayden. I can see you there in the corner as I talk through. So I'll just keep moving through. So this is the connection between livability, health and planning. And I just want people to be aware of why this is important and how it connects to our work as well. This is where I'm going to talk to you about a tool we have developed at RMIT called the Australian Urban Observatory. And I encourage you all to have a look in here. It is something that we launched just before COVID hit last year, which is probably not the best of time, but it's given people lots of opportunity to look at things in their own homes. So this is our front page, and actually importantly, it has been developed over about 8 years, looking at a whole range of livability indicators that have been created with a whole team of people across Australia. So they have really informed the development of the best indicators to create for livability. And then there's been a large amount of research in the background that has validated the use of those indicators as well. So we have produced the portal here, and from there we're able to take these livability indicators and make them available in the Australian Urban Observatory. So you can see there's a range of tabs you can go through, and there's actually a short introductory video on the front page that you can listen to in your own time as well. So what's this actual portal do and what's in it? So in terms of the observatory, it's a digital planning platform transforming complex urban data into livability indicators for 21 cities in Australia. Why 21 cities? So this is not just Victoria, this is right across the country, because these are the 21 cities that are also going to be, they're being measured and monitored across the national or federal government, looking at the National Cities Performance Framework, which also has connection into the Sustainable Development Goals and Australia's contribution and measurement to those. So within all of our indicators included in the AUO, we also have relevant Sustainable Development Goals connected to each of those. So what we're really trying to get people to think about is, one, what is this livability issue? How do I understand it? How does it connect to the SDGs or the Sustainable Development Goals? How does it connect to my local environment as well? In terms of the indicators included, we would say it's an observatory because it's really looking at observation and understanding of the most important social, economic and environmental issues. So previously, I did lead a project in Victoria that was called Community Indicators Victoria. And we learned through that work, one, of what we could do, the benefits of spatial research, and how we could do that to create our own data sets to understand some of these real important issues, but also the need to expand to make it broader, not just within Victoria, but across the country as well. What we wanted to do with the observatory is really to make this understanding and measurement of livability easier for people. So we had a lot of people talking about livability, but no one really clearly defining it. And obviously, before you can measure anything, you need to understand what it is and how you would define it before you can do that measurement aspect. So it's really important just for understanding in terms of what does this concept mean, what could it connect to, but also really important for the measurement and the creation of indicators or aggregated and abbreviated statistics across these areas, across those key issues. For us, it's also really important because academics are well known for sitting in ivory towers, but we don't want to do that. We actually want to take research knowledge and try and make it more accessible and to make it more relevant to the work of practitioners, particularly policymakers and planners, but also advocacy groups, or whether it be philanthropic groups looking for the greatest need in terms of working with partners. So we're really trying to take some of this knowledge that we've built up and share it. And that's really what we refer to of that translation of research knowledge into practice. But for us, it's the bit that once we hand it across and start working with somebody else and they do the extra work where that real impact from the research comes out. Why the observatory? So for us, livability indicators, these are designed to inform policy, planning and practice. So it is that translation aspect. Really, it's very hard when you're working so hard, particularly in policy and planning settings, to be able to go back and evaluate and understand what worked well and what didn't work well, because that's always going to happen when we're working across communities. So for us, we're trying to make evidence available, research evidence that's useful, that can help to design effective policy outcomes. So if we're going to create a whole range of public parks across an area, there's no point putting all those parks in an area that has the most parks already. So actually understanding where are the gaps in the allocation of public parks, then that might inform where you would put them. That's a really nice, simple example. Also ongoing. So in terms of understanding how things are travelling over time, we need to keep producing indicators over time. So at the moment we have 2018 indicators included in the Australian Urban Observatory, those livability indicators, but we're also working to release new ones again for 2020 later this year. The reason we have 2018 results is that we actually had to do a lot of work to get that process and the research completed and understand those processes before we could launch the observatory in 2020. My years are sort of merged now between our COVID break. What's really important is we don't want everybody reinventing the wheel. So if we have this knowledge too, it's also making it available. So rather than employing someone to come in and do this for one area, we've done it across the country. And you'll also have the ability to look at, well, what are our results and what are other people's results? And how do that compare across the country? So we actually use percentiles in some of our indicator results. So you have a sense of, well, how are we travelling? But most importantly, it's really looking within the area to understand where are the areas of greatest need. So our goal is really to use this type of information to work with the community. So there's no point people in academia or in government holding this brilliant information and never sharing it. But because we're able to produce maps, which are like pictures in some ways, they're much easier to understand and make a beautiful way of trying to talk to the community to build up a vision of, well, what would we like to achieve? What is our vision for our whole of community, for everybody who lives here, not just the people who are able to make the decisions? So that community engagement or the community connection aspect of using research knowledge or indicators, livability indicators, is really important for this space as well. It's about bringing people together around that understanding. So what's included? We have a livability index, a walkability index, a social infrastructure index, a number of measures of public transport, food, alcohol, public open space, employment and housing. They're the key domains that we've worked with at this point in time, and there's nothing to say that we will be expanding beyond them. But I guess at some point we also have to make sure how we can produce this information continues over time. So the sustainability of ourselves and our team at RMIT is one of those important factors as well. So we have a small team that work on this, and we're really trying to take the learnings from a whole range of research that we do and bring it back to the observatory in the creation of new indicators. So I hope to see new ones coming at some point too. And this is what it looks like. So here's our front page. You can go in and have a look. And then I'm going to give you a couple of little demonstrations before we go into a live version. So really, when it comes to the results that we present, in general, we don't often see a load of data that's available below a local government area level. So it's a municipal or council area. And you can see here, I've got on screen our mapping portal, which we can go through to. And that really shows you the local government area results for the livability index If you look in the top right, you'll see the livability index is the actual indicator that we have up here on display. And then we have something called the summary scale, which really refers to the geography. And we're able to show this in terms of a local government area level scale, the suburb results, or the SA1, statistical area level 1, which we refer to as neighbourhood. So we have those 3 different levels that you're able to have a look at. So here we can see local government area results, and you can see down the south, look for your area, and you can see some pink happening on there when we come and look across this area for overall livability. But when you get closer to the inner areas of Melbourne, you see a lot of green. The simple way of able to interpret this is green is good and pink or red is not so great. So in terms of livability, it may be not a terrible result, but it means that really when we're looking at these areas compared, that some are not doing as well as others. This is really important as an overall aspect too, which I didn't talk about earlier and I often do, which is the difference between equality and equity. Within public health, this is a really important concept because when we look at a map like this, we also want to understand some of the differences that we start with and where are some of those areas of greatest need. So if you hear about equality, it's really the ability of everyone being treated the same. That's great if we all come from that same starting place. But if people are a little bit lower down in the scale in terms of what they had to start with, equality doesn't work so well. Then what we'd argue for is equity. That the people who need the greatest resource are given extra support to lift up to that same level. So it's really about the direction of resources into the people that really need it. And that's really important when it comes to thinking about livability and sustainability, in my opinion, because we really don't want to just see that it's the people that can afford to make changes that make them, but also that we're supporting those that can't, because it's not to say that the will is not there. Okay, so I'll get back off there. That's our local government area level result, and we can move down. In this next slide, you can see we're moving down into suburbs. And this is where we see more variability. So at that greater council area of LGA, we see a lot of the same colour. When you start moving down into suburb, you start to see a bit more of pink and green across areas. And that's because some suburbs are actually going to be doing quite well still. And this is again, thinking about livability, just the livability index, which are very overarching, not really detailed. So just think it's a sort of like a big picture assessment. And then moving down again, we can look at something like the suburb level. Now here you can see, I can actually see Dandenong listed. It's right near the legend on the map on this slide. And you can start to see lots of green areas. So it's to say again that when you get down to that neighbourhood level, it takes away that big level aggregation. When you put everything in together, it might average out as not being so great. But when you look at the individual components, you start to see a bit of a different picture. And this is really important. So on this particular slide in front of you, I have actually got an area that's been highlighted, and it's actually within a different local government area. But you can see what the AUO is able to do, because we're able to look at a particular neighbourhood and get a whole range of overall estimates that are really important to livability, and then get a sense of what is that area looking like and what are some of the strengths and weaknesses of that area. And that's when it's really important in thinking about change or understanding the strengths and weaknesses of particular areas too. So that's when we move down from local government area to suburb to neighbourhood or SA1. And that gives you a brief introduction into what's in the Australian Urban Observatory. We'll go on and do a live version soon. First of all, I want to show you this one last tool that I encourage you to have a look at that was only released about 3 weeks ago here at RMIT. So if you click down on that impact tab on our homepage, or just type in the address auo.org.au/transport-health-assessment, This is actually a new tool that's been developed with my colleagues. Belen's a part of Diomede and Lucy Gunn here at RMIT, as well as Alan Boss. And we've really created this transport and health assessment tool, which looks at the health impacts and the impact on developing diseases, chronic disease, that can be altered by changing short driving trips, so trips you would do in your car in a community, to either walking and cycling. So it sounds quite complicated, but the model makes it look very easy to look at, where you can basically, instead of driving my car for 2 kilometres, I'm going to change the population and then get them into walking within 1 kilometre. And when you get those changes to occur, you can see these huge impacts on health. So this is actually a tool that is also very much connected to Foreverfest and sustainability, because it's really showing at this point in time the health impacts of changes of transport mode. But you can also understand that the more we get people off roads, that we're also changing the air quality in that particular area, and we're getting people a lot more active. So there's a whole heap of things happening within that tool. So that's just for interest if you'd like to have a look. I won't go into it now, but I did want to mention it to you. Now, I'm going to move across, and I'd like to see if we can get a little bit of interaction here. And I know we haven't got a great number of people, but if you could all have a go in here. I've got a couple of questions. And Barney, I'm going to see if I can ask people to answer these questions about their local environment, and then we can use it to explore, to have a look where these places are and what's going on using the AUO. Does that sound good?
Sounds like a plan. We're ready for the questions.
Okay, you're ready. Oh. Okay, here we go. What do you think is the most, so for this one, you can see, you can either get your phone out of your pocket and use that QR code, which we're all very familiar with these days. If you put your phone on that QR code, it should take you through to this website called Slido. And it will come up with the same question that's on my screen. Alternatively, you can just type in slido.com. And then in terms of the code, you need to look at I think we've got 4 questions, not many, maybe it's 5 questions. It's not many, they're not hard to do. You can type in 434863, and then you should also come up with the same place. So the first thing, and I'm hoping there's a few people who are local enough to be able to do this, I want you to think about, what do you think is the most important ingredient for making the city of Dandenong a livable place? So I've spoken to you a bit, and I gave you a bit of an introduction, talked about our definition of livability. But if all those things I've talked about so far, can you think about one feature of the city of Greater Dandenong that you think makes it a livable place? This may be a little hard first thing in the morning, but I'm hoping you can all think of one thing. If you enter your answers now, they'll come up on screen and we can look at them. Beautiful. I've got one. Is anyone else going to have a go? Fantastic. I think, look, this is the one I was wondering was going to come up, multicultural diversity. I was thinking that's got to be important. It's definitely one of the things I think of. I think of good food, but did I talk about that? Really, local shops and services are part of a livable place. Okay, so about half of you have had a go. Transport. I'm interested. Whoever put transport in, can you tell me a little bit more about what sort of transport you're thinking about? Okay, access to affordable living. This is important. Active and public transport. Fantastic. Okay, thank you, person, for doing that. All right, I won't make you go too hard. These will still be available if anyone thinks of something they want to put in. And it's always nice to see, you know, those kind of ones. I think I get easier because I've got you multiple choice on the next one, or maybe it's the one up. Let's see. Oh no, this one I want you to think about. So I have a bit of a passion for green spaces. So I'm getting you to think about it. And somebody did put in that the natural spaces were something of interest, and you thought it was a great feature of the area. But now I want to know more about a location. So what is the name of your favourite public open space? And that might be a park, a green space, or a nature space within the city of Greater Dandenong. Can you put some names down for me? Because what we're going to do is have a look at them on our livability map in the AUO afterwards. So that's why I'm interested. And if we had people saying more than one reserve or something like the Alex Wilkie Reserve, if more than one person said it, it would definitely give me some incentive to look at that particular area. Or do you all come up with different ones and we can just pick one? Oh, Tatterson Park must be good. Okay, we're coming up with the same ones. Has anyone got a different one to go to? These are definitely, wow, I'm doing some work with Melbourne Water at the moment. I'm sure they're very pleased to hear the Melbourne Water Recreation Area is something of interest. So these sound like people really like them, which is great. Anything out of Alex Wilkie Nature Reserve or Tatterson Park? I'm just going to write them down. Nothing extra to add. Tatterson Park, all right. Now, sorry for Melbourne Water Recreation Area. Whoever put that one in, it's not getting many friends. But well, we're definitely getting a good result for those two. So next one to go with these. How do you usually travel to this local public open space? So if you're going to any public open space, and yours may not be one of the ones listed, how would you normally get there most of the time? Wow. Okay, we're seeing a real mix. So there's normally about 5 of you. This is interesting. Okay, so one public transport, mainly cars. Okay, this is where I want to have a look at these on screens. Car, walking, cycling, PT. 17%, 17%, 17%. All right, good. And next one, I've got another local area question. That's really interesting that over half people drive there. Tells us something. Okay, now just moving through to the next one. In what suburb do you usually buy your milk, bread and everyday needs within the local government area of Greater Dandenong? This is an interesting one, and people don't think about livability as being to do with these things, but this is actually critical for a number of reasons. Right in the middle, Dandenong. Okay. Anyone not a Dandenong? Okay. I love how we get Coles getting a promo here. Anyone else? Everyone's going into the heart of Dandenong by the sound of it. That's fascinating too. Okay, so let's have a look. Dandenong Market. Okay, yeah. So we've got a few happening in here, but definitely it sounds like people are going into the heart of the area, which is really interesting to know. So you might not think about it, but something like where you buy your milk and bread and everyday needs, you know, the place you normally go when you think of the shops. This is critical for walkability. You wouldn't think so. People think walkability might be about nice footpaths or something else. But we also need to think about, we always need a reason to walk. So a destination is one of the 3 critical components of walkability. The other aspect is really thinking about the road network and how it allows us to move around. And the other would be density. So if we have reasonable density, not flat, low level density, then we're able to really encourage more people to be in a place, which supports more shops, which encourages more of that kind of mixed business. So that's why it's really interesting, and I think Dandenong's a great example of that. Thank you very much for doing my little poll. For Dandenong, how would you usually travel to the shopping area? I've probably kind of biased you a little bit here, but that's okay. So we've got 2 people in. Okay, 3, 4. Interesting. And you notice, of course, we've talked about Coles coming in here and being important, but also thinking about car parking and how that influences how we move around and what we do in a local area as well. I have a colleague, Liz Taylor, you might have heard about Elizabeth Taylor, who's now at Monash. She does all of her research. She's completely fascinated with car parking, and it really has such a huge impact on how we live and how we plan and the livability of an area, because we tend to normally always plan according to car first. But you'll notice even in my thinking of writing these responses out, that generally I like to think about it being walking first, then cars. Oh, that's the wrong way. It should be walking, should be cycling, should be public transport, cars last. But we tend to hierarchy the other way around, which is not the way we'd like to do it for a livable place. Okay, so now we've got 57% walk, we've got 29% car, and we've got 14% PT. No cyclists. Okay, that's interesting to note. When we went to the park, we had 17% cyclists, so something's happening there. All right, so now I think we've finished our slides. Okay, and I'd like to stop sharing my screen for a sec and change what I'm presenting so we can literally get in and have a look at Dandenong and the AUO. Does anyone have any questions that they had so far that they wanted to ask? Otherwise, I shall just keep moving. Okay.
Melanie, I have a really quick one. Do you think COVID's kind of sparked, and I really like your link to the Sustainable Development Goals and clearly ESG action as well with your social, economic and environmental indicator focus, but do you think that COVID has put more of a stress on people wanting more green spaces and open spaces and more kind of priority on looking after biodiversity?
Oh, definitely. And you could see, like, interestingly, I probably had done most media last year that I've done in my whole life, only because the interest was coming up. We've been pushing for things like 20-minute neighbourhoods, about the importance of local livability, not just cities and the inner city looking good, but trying to think about everywhere. So, and then that public open space push where everyone ended up at the park, that was fascinating too, because suddenly everyone was stuck living in their local area. So it was fantastic. It was nearly like a natural experiment you could have imagined would ever happen. So yes, definitely. I think sustainable development goals are an interesting one. I think people do think about sustainable development. I think though it tends to be at a spectrum that we kind of get the hardcore or the nothing, that we don't tend to connect between, say, planning and sustainability as well, you know, to try and get disciplines to think across or portfolios to think across, so that we can try and bring people together a little bit more in the way we're thinking about some of these issues.
And I think making it culturally relevant is also a challenge. If you've got, 70% of your, governance space doesn't speak, English as their first language, trying to break down the SDGs and all 17 of those goals into relevance for your culture and your religion and your language, that definitely is a barrier for entry. But I think it's an opportunity, and I hope from what we're doing with Forever Fest and the 8 themes that we're exploring, that we can link not only to the direct themes, but, you know, having one or two solutions for each of the SDGs for the greater city of Dandenong, and then being able to convey it to community leaders and get them to kind of communicate and make it relevant. Because I think, you know, you go onto the UN's website and it's like, oh my God, that's a lot of text, you know, but just to see one or two solutions and maybe a sort of human example of that within your council or within your state or within your country, I think it humanizes it and localizes it, which I think is needed for especially something international like the SDGs, which those 17 goals are not going to be relevant for India in the same way that they're going to be relevant to Australia or you know, South America or anything like that. So making it relevant, I think, a huge opportunity in these coming years.
Yeah, but interestingly, Melanie, we've just finishing off a project with the Bangkok Municipal Association. So, okay, from Dandenong all the way to Thailand. And they have really pushed on really embedding the Sustainable Development Goals and creating an indicator system, not unlike what I'm showing you here with the AUO. So it's relevant to their work because, just as a contextual example, say flooding has been a really big issue, particularly around some of the more, you know, the slums really across the rivers in Bangkok. That's a real problem for them. Mm-hmm. So it's really taking some of the understanding of livability that we had here in Melbourne and working with you to understand what it meant in Bangkok, and then creating indicators to measure that and connecting them in with the SDGs. So I think it's about that. It is about communication and making it understandable. But look, I'll give you an example in here of what we measure. And because I'm going to go, let's just go to public open space because we sort of talked about it and I like it. You can see here, we talk about why it's important in the start when we go in. This is in the observatory. And then we have the relevant Sustainable Development Goals. And you can see definitely they're important for good health and well-being, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities. And a lot of our work really does go around that goal 11, thinking about sustainable cities and community, but also life on the land, also connecting in there as well. And one of my favourite ones in terms of sustainable cities talks about making these spaces accessible to people with disabilities and to women. So, you know, that connects into some of the safety that came up when people were talking about one of the best things about Dandenong was feelings of safety and personal safety. So you can see how we just have to make this conversation a bit broader to bring it in here and make it relevant rather than going, oh, this is that United Nations thing that's nothing to do with me. Exactly. Really trying to bring, and I guess it also goes with that idea of engaging the community in shared visioning. So that we want to talk about these things together. There's no point just us talking about it if we're interested, but also bringing everyone along the ride. I think it's really important. So I'm just going to go, because I know we've probably got 10 minutes or so. So I want to save some time for questions, which is good. But I'm going to go into the observatory portal. I'll just show you again how I do it. So I come to this front home page. And of course, I go to log in and it's going to know all my details, which is fantastic. And I say, yep, sign me in. We just have an email to go in there. And then it's going to take me through. And I'm like clicking. So I'm going to click on the map down to Melbourne. That's going to take me down to Melbourne. Now, we've logged in and you're going to see that in the account that I hold as well, that I have access down to neighbourhood for all of them. Within the observatory, we make everything available at the local government area level, and both Liveability Index and the Social Infrastructure Index available down to neighbourhood level. We ask for funding partnerships, really at this point with organisations to try and support ourselves ongoing. And that was a learning lesson of the past, that lots of people like to use things, but it's hard to get ourselves funded because we're neither one side of academia nor the policy side. So we're kind of sitting a bit on the fence trying to do this work. But we're going to go, and the first thing, top left, I'm going to search for the suburb of Dandenong. Okay, so let's just go to centre Dandenong. Right, and I'll just zoom out a little bit. And you can see the borders actually on here. I'm going to go down and I'm going to go to a neighbourhood level. So this is the centre of Dandenong in here. And I can change things in this map if I want to look at some of the other features to do with it. But at this point, I'm just going to leave it highlighted to show me. I can turn that off if I want. So I've got Dandenong up. Next thing is I'm going to look at, where's one I like? All right, walkability for transport. We see livability is up and it's looking very green across the centre of Dandenong. And walkability and livability do go together. Again, you can see across the middle areas here, middle neighbourhoods of Dandenong, we've got lots of beautiful green. If we were to take this up to the local government area level, you're probably going to see a lot less green. But you can see how we have these nice areas that are doing well. And these are the real strengths that we want to highlight in an area like this. Another one, because we're talking to public open space, let's have a look. Let's have a look at average distance, the closest open space. Okay, so this is an interesting, it's a real patchwork result. So for this result, I wish I need the chance to be able to look up where maybe, what did we say, Alex Wilkie? I'm trying to look up where the park is. I think something's not working for me. Alex Wilkie Nature Reserve. I'm going to try and find it. So Springvale South, I can see. It must be up around here somewhere. Okay, I think it's around here. So you can see actually there's a really big area happening out here as well. Spring Valley Park, something around there. Dingley, I can see some areas. So here I think maybe our Alex Wilkie, which is a nice area. This one is average distance. If I click on an area here, so I've literally clicked on a neighbourhood near this, it's telling me this selected indicator, the average distance to a park is only 164 metres. That's amazing. So these people live in a lovely spot, I would be guessing here. In terms of what we know from the Victorian planning provisions, we aim for something like 95% of people living within 400 metres of a local park or public open space. And this person's living within this neighbourhood within 164. But even if we pick on another one, and we pick on this particular area, here 455. So they're just having to walk a little bit further. And this can be designed and influenced obviously by how the roads are set up in an area. Because even though it's just a hop across, you've got to walk all your way around to get to it. And that increases the distances. But there's a lot of nice people living near some nice parks, I would guess, in this area here, which is really fascinating to look at. But these people up here are getting a little bit further away. So 537 metres, which is over half a K now for people to walk, and then they might be less likely. When I click on those areas though, you can also see a lot of other results for this livability scorecard. And you can have a look at things